What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Face Off Sports Network. I'm Anthony Servino with my top waiver wire pickups for fantasy football week 7. Let's get right into it. We're going to start with Sean Tucker. Now, I get what you're saying. Sean Tucker's might be a little bit buried on the depth chart with Rashod White and Bucky Irving in the mix. But Bucky Irving has been playing well. Rashod White, on the other hand, we know has not been playing well. He's been inefficient, and now he's dealing with a foot injury that caused him an inactive status last week. We don't know if this foot injury will linger for Rashod White. And if Rashod White misses time, Sean Tucker is going to have a little bit of a role. And Sean Tucker, with a little bit of a role, we saw what he was able to do last week. 34.2 PPR points, 27 offensive snaps, 14 carries for 136 yards, and a touchdown. He also caught all 3 of his targets for 56 yards and another score. Sean Tucker, as we know, was a really talented back, but he had the health concerns coming out of college that hindered his year one. We also know that they force-fed Rashod White last season. We really didn't see Sean Tucker on the field much. Things could change now, because if Rashod White does indeed miss another game and we see the tandem of Bucky Irving and Sean Tucker not only play good football at the running back position, but continue to play efficient football at the running back position. And efficiency, as we know, is the Achilles heel of Bucky Irving. Then is there a guarantee that Rashod White returns to a prominent role in this backfield? I'm going to say no, because there's a case to be made that both Bucky Irving and Sean Tucker are superior running backs over Rashod White. So Sean Tucker, he is somebody I'm going to call a speculative ad. If you have a need at running back, if you have a deep bench, if you have guys on IR and you have an open roster spot, I'm taking a chance and I want to roster Sean Tucker. And oh, by the way, the playoff schedule, Tampa has a rough running back schedule the next few games going into their bye week, but coming out of their bye from week 12 to week 17, especially in the fantasy playoffs, anything can happen. What if Rashod White gets another injury? What if Bucky Irving suffers an injury? You want to stash Sean Tucker because of what we already saw him do. There's not many guys that we're going to get on a waiver wire with this type of a ceiling. He's a speculative ad, but he's a guy I absolutely want to add on all of my fantasy teams that I can. Let's go to my next guy. This is a running back, Issac Guerendo, San Francisco 49ers. This is another guy. There's no guarantee he sees the field either. Jordan Mason, as we know, was a little bit banged up on Thursday Night Football against the Seattle Seahawks, with a shoulder injury, an AC joint to be exact. He is already sporting a red non-contact jersey during Monday's practice, but they're calling it a sprain. And the 49ers aren't really telling us much, but they're not really saying that it's a significant injury either, which means we're going to consider Mason day-to-day. But this is another situation where if Mason misses time, and we know CMC, he's already sidelined, then Issac Guerendo is going to step into a prominent role. Look at all of the touches and production we've gotten out of Mason. And even last week against Seattle, Guerendo's first real action of the year, season-high 16 offensive snaps. He took 10 carries for 99 yards. Granted, he had one big play that he popped on, but still, it still counts in fantasy. He had 9.9 PPR points. He was not targeted in the passing game. They get the Chiefs next. So with bye weeks and running back injuries, I get this isn't a great matchup against Kansas City. But when you're going to get significant volume like the 49ers like to give their running backs, then this is a guy you want to start in fantasy. Again, this is if Jordan Mason misses time. But Guerendo is another guy you want to add on your fantasy teams. Let's go to my third running back. That's Ty Chandler. I don't like Ty Chandler as much as other people do. I really think he's just a guy. I think he's just a change of pace back. But we don't know what's going on right now with Aaron Jones. Now, we know that Aaron Jones suffered the hip injury in London. He had the bye week to rest. He's a 29-year-old running back. The good thing is that during Monday's practice, Aaron Jones was on the field. They called, and this is per Kevin Seifert of ESPN, and the quote is he described it as a late bonus session coming out of the bye week, but Aaron Jones was there, and that's good news. We don't know the availability of Aaron Jones yet, and what we have to do here, we have to monitor the practice reports. If Aaron Jones is out, I would be a little bit worried, but if he returns to limited sessions, then I would think he's going to play. That doesn't mean we don't want to roster Ty Chandler because, hey, we could see Aaron Jones in a slightly limited role, and we could see Chandler get an uptick in touches. I don't exactly think he's that good of a running back, but still, when we're dealing with injuries, bye weeks, and overall struggles from players, you need to put guys in your fantasy football lineup sometimes. Like you need to fill out a roster spot, and you can do a lot worse than Ty Chandler, who is tied to one of the best offenses in the NFL. What I don't like, you get the Detroit Lions this week. They're the fourth toughest matchup on the calendar for enemy running backs. And against the Jets in London, for what it's worth, we saw a significant snap share, 40 snaps for Ty Chandler following the Aaron Jones injury. He got 14 rushes for only 30 yards and caught both of his targets for 9 yards. So Ty Chandler, if he does see action, we're going to view Ty Chandler as extremely touchdown dependent in a tough matchup against the Detroit Lions. Let's go to my final running back. We saw this rookie pop a little bit this weekend, Kimani Vidal. Now, didn't get a lot. 18 offensive snaps, 6 touches, 51 yards and a touchdown. He did most of his damage on a long touchdown reception and score. But still 13.1 PPR points. J.K. Dobbins dominated and probably will continue to dominate this backfield. But with Gus Edwards on IR, this does open up the door for extended reps, extended snaps for Kimani Vidal. And what do we know? When Gus Edwards was healthy, and even when J.K. Dobbins was popping the first 2 games of the year, Gus Edwards got significant workload. It's not like it was close to a 50-50 split where we saw Gus Edwards, he didn't do much with him. But, he had 18 carries in week 2, 11 carries in week 1. He was getting a significant workload, which means we could see Kimani Vidal get, maybe he pushes 10, 12 touches a game. And that is with J.K. Dobbins leading the way. This is a team that runs the ball enough and emphasizes the run to where both of these running backs could get enough touches to produce in fantasy football. We also know that J.K. Dobbins has a lengthy injury history, and if anything happens there, Kimani Vidal likely steps in to be the guy. Let's go to wide receivers. We're going to start with Pop Douglas. DeMario Douglas. He came on strong last season down the stretch. And after the first 2 games of the year, the Patriots didn't look good, and neither did Pop Douglas. He had 3 targets through the first 2 games. But in 3 out of his past 4 games, we're starting to see an ascension. He has had at least 11.9 PPR points in 3 out of his past 4 games. In all 3 of those games, he's had 9 targets in every one. He has now scored a touchdown last week on a season best 692-1 stat line, season high 21.2 PPR points in his first full game with Drake Maye. I like Drake Maye. We'll talk about him later. He's a promising young rookie. I think he can play the quarterback well. He has a big arm. And I think he can grow with a guy like DeMario Douglas and even Jalen Polk and Kayshon Boutte, who we saw had a good game last week as well. You can use DeMario Douglas this week. The Patriots, they play the Jacksonville Jaguars. They're the second easiest matchup for enemy wide receivers. If you need a plug-and-play wide receiver on the waiver wire, Pop Douglas is your guy. Let's go to another wide receiver we should be adding, and that's Michael Wilson. Michael Wilson, he might have an extended role in this offense. Marvin Harrison Jr., he was concussed last week. And we're seeing right now at Malik Neighbors, it's no longer in the NFL a one-week turnaround from concussion. It could be a multi-week absence. And if that's the case, Michael Wilson likely operates as the wide receiver one in this wide receiver room. I get Zay Jones returning from a suspension. They have Dortch, but Michael Wilson has a lengthy rapport with Kyler Murray. Michael Wilson also, in 3 out of his past 4 games, has given us at least a high floor of 10 PPR points. I wish the volume was there a little bit more, but he is still at least being used. I don't like this run of matchups coming. The Chargers are 5th against wide receivers, Chicago 6th, Miami 2nd, Jets 4th. Then you got the bye week. This is going to be a really rough run for the Cardinals, for Kyler, for Michael Wilson. But again, if Michael Wilson could potentially operate as his team's wide receiver one, he's at least going to get some opportunities. So we're adding Michael Wilson. Let's go to another receiver, Rashod Bateman. And crazy enough, like Rashod Bateman, it's taken him a little bit, but he started to string together some productive football games. As rough as it's been early in his career, Rashod Bateman's starting to play a little bit. 3 out of his past 4 games, at least 11.1 PPR points. He's had 12 total targets in his past 2 games. He scored a touchdown in 2 of his past 4, and he's making big plays. Enough big plays, right? The volume's not always going to be here because they're a run-heavy team with Lamar and Derrick Henry. Zay Flowers gets a ton of targets. We're starting to see Mark Andrews get back in the mix. They have likely. There's a lot of guys, which means the opportunities that Bateman is going to get, he's going to have to capitalize with the big play. And we've seen that so far with how effective he's been when catching the football. So Rashod Bateman, a couple of nice matchups upcoming. Tampa 26, a potential shootout. Cleveland, I don't see shootout potential, but this is a team that you can probably walk all over. They're 20th. So 2 nice opportunities ahead for Rashod Bateman to be used in our fantasy football lineups. Let's go to another receiver, and that's Xavier Legette. I like Xavier Legette a lot. Deontay Johnson, obviously, he's the guy right now. And he's the most productive wide receiver in the wide receiver room for the Panthers. But there's already rumors that Deontay Johnson could potentially be traded. And if Deontay Johnson is traded, guess who's going to operate more than likely as a wide receiver one? Safe to say it's going to be Xavier Legette, who is starting to come on a little bit. 2 out of his past 3 games, we've seen Xavier Legette double-digit PPR points. He popped for 19 back in week 4, where he had 10 targets. He's had 2 games this year, over 7 targets. I don't love the offense he's on. I don't love his quarterback. But Andy Dalton is a very good bridge quarterback. He certainly moves the ball more effectively than we've ever seen from Bryce Young, even at Dalton's age. He's going to get rid of the football. And what's especially good with rostering a guy like Xavier Legette, the Carolina Panthers, their defense sucks. I don't have a good thing to say about it. And when your defense sucks, you're going to be playing from behind, which means you're going to have to throw the football. And when you're throwing the football, there's going to be targets distributed all over the place. And we're going to see some spike weeks from Xavier Legette. Talk about a potential ridiculous game where you're going to get pummeled. You get Washington next week coming off a loss, and Washington's defense, they're still really bad against the pass. Washington, the way they run the ball, they might put up 50 this week, which means a lot of garbage time production, possibly in the direction of the aforementioned Xavier Legette. Let's go to Romeo Doubs. I like Romeo Doubs a lot this week, and we could also add Christian Watson. Both Doubs and Watson, I believe, depending on where you play, they're rostered in fewer than 50% of leagues, or at least right around there. Watson scored this week, had his biggest game of the year. So did Romeo Doubs, had his biggest game of the year, and plus his first 2 touchdowns of the year, 19.9 PPR points for him. I believe Watson had right around 15.8. The more volume for Romeo Doubs, obviously, where Watson only had 4 targets. I don't think he's had more than 5 this season in the games he's played. We saw Doubs last week. Oh, he only had 4 as well, but cashed in for 3 for 49 and 2 scores. The way Jordan Love is throwing the football right now, he's playing like a point guard. There's enough to go around. There's enough. And we saw this last year. This is why all these Packers receivers, they were drafted so high, including their wide receiver for Dontavian Wicks, because there is enough to go around. And they throw the ball a lot. Like, everybody loved Josh Jacobs. I faded him because I think he was going to be 2 touchdown dependent. We're seeing that. He's getting the yards. He's not scoring. Why isn't he scoring? Because Jordan Love is scoring the football with his arm, and he's distributing it like a point guard. Every week, the top receivers on the Green Bay Packers, they have a chance to score, and there's a good chance multiple wide receivers score. So you want to get Doubs now that he's potentially back in good graces with the team after a suspension. You want to add him. You also want to try to add Christian Watson. If it's me, I'm prioritizing Christian Watson more because he has the highest ceiling. I get Jaden Reed is there. If we get Christian Watson cooking, we know this guy is capable of putting up 20 to 30 PPR points on a given day. So I think his ceiling is a lot higher than Romeo Doubs. Because we've seen it this year. Like, Doubs had some games where he's had 7 or 8 targets, and he hasn't delivered more than 9 PPR points. He's really a possession guy. He really needs to score to return value, which we saw last week. But, again, you add him for his floor. But if you want a guy who could potentially win you a week, I would err on the side of Christian Watson. Let's go to my last 2 players, and these are quarterbacks. My first one, Drake Maye. I said it like I was more optimistic than most on Drake Maye. Hated the fact that he was drafted to the Patriots in a dire situation with piss poor skill position weapons around him. But I think this kid's a good quarterback, 22 years old, big body, big arm, mobile, 6'4", 225. I think the Patriots have their quarterback of the future, and we saw a little bit of a glimpse. Let's face it, the Texans were not an easy matchup. They're a good defense, and usually good defense can get after a young quarterback in his first start, nonetheless. Instead, we saw Drake Maye put up 28 fantasy points, an efficient 20 of 33, 60.6% completion percentage, did make some mistakes. He threw 2 picks and lost a fumble, but he also threw 3 touchdowns. He also ran 5 times for 38 yards, and he distributed the ball well to his wide receivers. We talked about DeMario Douglas, Kayshon Boutte, Hunter Henry. Like, there's enough here for this guy to be productive. And, oh, by the way, there was no Ram Stevenson, who was nursing an injury. He was out. This Patriots offense could be deceptively productive at times this year, especially when the Ram comes back. Got Jacksonville this week. I said you could start Pop Douglas against Jacksonville. You could certainly start Drake Maye against Jacksonville. And I might even put this kid in my DFS lineups, depending on how the ownership projections look. But, let's say this guy gets cooking, like fantasy playoffs. And this is more of a super flex league, right? Where if you're thinking about fantasy playoffs with Drake Maye, it's super flex. But even in single quarterback, there's been some piss poor quarterback play from our stars. If you drafted Anthony Richardson, if you drafted Deshaun Watson, Mahomes isn't playing well. Drake Maye already has a 28-point game. If this guy gets comfortable, we're looking at fantasy playoff matchups going into the playoffs in in week 13, they were really bad against quarterbacks. Arizona in week 15, really bad. Buffalo, like that defense is overrated. They're middle of the pack against quarterbacks. So get ahead of the market and go get Drake Maye right now. Let's finish up with possibly one of my favorite ads of the week, Daniel Jones. I get it. Daniel Jones on national TV didn't look good this past week. This is the issue with Daniel Jones. He's really inconsistent, but he's given us 3 games this year with over 20.1 quarterback fantasy points. In those 3 games, he's thrown for 2 touchdowns in each one. He's running the ball well. He has 3 games this year over 32 yards rushing and 4 games over 20 yards rushing. He has explosive receivers now, right? Like Malik Neighbors is going to be back soon. And we are already seeing Wan'Dale Robinson on pace for a career year. Darius Slayton, when he's, in the years past, Darius Slayton was your number 1 wide receiver. That's not great. But when you have Malik Neighbors commanding the top end coverage and the double coverage, and all of a sudden Slayton, a veteran who's been with Daniel Jones since Daniel Jones has been drafted with that rapport, and then you have Wan'Dale, all of a sudden this Giants offense, they're 3 deep at wide receiver. What about Tyrone Tracy, who looks like the real deal, who can also catch passes to help Daniel Jones because he's a converted wide receiver? What about the tight end Johnson out of Penn State? He's been playing a lot of snaps. He's eventually going to get more opportunity in this offense. Like and Brian Dable, I like him a lot. He's a really good offensive coach. I said it about Drake Maye in the past. This is an offense you might want to start buying into as it gels and as the schedule opens up down the stretch. I would also try to buy into the Giants a little bit. Don't go crazy. Don't overpay. But if you can get your hands on some of these assets, they have a strong enough schedule, especially in the fantasy playoffs. Week 15 against Baltimore, 30th against quarterbacks. Atlanta, week 16 in the middle of the pack, 16th. And then you fantasy championship people out there, if you get there, you got Indy, they're 28th. Again, the quarterback position this year has not been a slam dunk guarantee. Maybe, just maybe, you'll be starting Daniel Jones in the fantasy championship, which means get it ahead of the market and buy him now. I'm Anthony Servino. If you like content like this, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, the alert icon, so you can be notified anytime we're live to answer your questions. We do that a lot, almost every day. Or we drop content just like this. If you have any waiver wire questions, start sit questions, trade questions, ask them in the comment section below. Myself or one of the other staff members here at the Face Off Sports Network will get back to you as soon as we can.